Sorry for the technical delays, folks. Welcome to the new findings in the application of behavioral insights to child support services session. In this session, we're going to be hearing about efforts to improve child support services using strategies and techniques based on behavioral economics. I'm Gretchen Lehman from the Office of Child Support Enforcement, and I've recently become one of the project officers for the Behavioral Interventions for Child Support Services demonstration, which we call BiX. Two of today's presentations focus on work done under BiX, so I'm going to provide just a brief background about it. In 2014, the Office of Child Support Enforcement awarded BiX demonstration grants to 8 child support programs in California, Colorado, the District of Columbia, Georgia, Ohio, Texas, Vermont, and Washington. At the same time, a grant to fund evaluation activities for BiX was awarded to Washington as well, which contracted with MDRC to support this work. Over the past 4 years, BiX grantees have developed and tested a variety of interventions to address child support program challenges, and the results have been very promising. Today, you'll hear from Roberta, or Bertie Mayers, about Vermont's work on resolution meetings. Roberta works for Veritas HHS, and she's the project director for the Vermont Behavioral Interventions and Child Support Grant. Susan Brown, the director of the Franklin County Child Support Enforcement Agency in Columbus, Ohio, will share insights from her county's tests to improve the child support order modification process. Susan's work with behavioral economics predates BiX. Franklin County was involved in OPRE's original project to bring behavioral economics into human services, the BIAS project. Peter Baird, senior associate at MDRC, has also been involved in BIAS and BiX, but today he's presenting on a study he conducted with funding from the Kellogg Foundation. This work focused on a state-level initiative, the Kansas Child Support Savings Initiative. You can read full bios for our panel on the RECS app. I've introduced them in the reverse order of our session. Peter will be starting us out with Kansas, then we'll turn to the BiX work with Susan's presentation, and Roberta will close us out. We'll have some time for questions at the end, so please be thinking of those along the way. Peter?
Hi, good morning, everyone. How do I get the slides up? Okay. So I had the pleasure of working as the evaluator for all 3 of these projects, and it's I've gotten to know Susan and Bertie really, really well. In fact, Bertie and I go back 25 years or something when I worked for the state of Vermont. We're going to start with Kansas, which was not a BiX project, as Gretchen said, and it was the one project up here that did not have impacts. I'd normally be hesitant to present on a program that didn't have statistical impacts. But I think there's some interesting lessons in it, and also it serves as a contrast of sorts to what Ohio and Vermont did in terms and Susan's going to make some comments, I think, that also are going to back up a point that becomes clear in this presentation. Let's start with what is the Kansas Child Support Initiative. It was a program established by the state of Kansas in 2013. It was a very innovative idea, which was to allow non-custodial parents, so these are parents who owe child support, who have debt, to allow them to save for their child's post-college and secondary education. Parents in significant child support debt, which they defined as over $1,000 of debt, could contribute to tax-advantaged educational savings accounts called 529. I use these myself. They're a way to accumulate savings for college for your children in a tax-free, where the earnings aren't taxed on it, or the saving, the interest accrued and isn't taxed on that. And they set it up so that if a parent gave money to this 529 account, the state would forgive a matching amount of state-owed child support arrears. There's basically 2 types of child support debt. One is what they owe to the state, which is for payments for Medicaid or TANF or some kind of public assistance, and the other is money they owe to that parent. They couldn't forgive the money owed to the parent, but they forgave the state money. And they had, it was popular with some people, but it had very low take-up. But basically, it was a program that allowed parents to save money for their child's education without spending more money. They were presenting on this idea, and they got the attention of the Kellogg Foundation. So the WK Kellogg Foundation gave them money to expand the program and do some evaluation of it. Kellogg's funding allowed Kansas to expand the program to match parents' contributions to 529s with money sent to the custodial parent. So basically, they could send money to the 529, and a matching amount of money would be sent to the parent, and they would lower their child support debt that way while saving money for their child's education. Again, the idea was they don't have to send any more money. They would just pay money they usually do, or they're usually supposed to do, and it would allow savings of for their children's future. The reason they did this is because there's evidence through numerous studies showing that even a small amount of savings in child education savings accounts increases the chance that they go to college by many-fold. The research might be funky in terms of like, does it set an expectation that child's going to go to school, or is the money really the big issue, or is it just that parents who do this maybe are more likely to have children to go to college? But it's this is their motivating factor. We received money at the same time from Kellogg to evaluate the program, and we applied insights. We decided to take a behavioral science approach to it. It was an area where we have a Center for Behavioral Science, Center for Applied Behavioral Studies that works on behavioral issues, and we thought this was a good challenge for that. I'm going to really briefly describe the behavioral diagnosis and design process that was used in all 3 sites to give you a context. But the first thing we do is define the problem. What is the problem? We define it without any prejudice. So the idea being that we identify a problem and we don't assume a solution in that problem. So we can say parents don't pay their child support debt. We don't say parents don't pay their child support debt because they have no jobs, because that's assuming the problem. So the idea is a neutral process. And then we diagnose it. We say, look at what's happening. We look at bottlenecks. And we try to say, is that bottleneck structural? Is it that they don't have enough money or staff, because that's a structural problem? Or is it that their forms that they send to people to telling them to pay their child support debt make no sense? Or do they not send forms at all? Do they not send reminders at all? So that's a behavioral issue. So then from that, we look at the bottlenecks and design a process to address them. And then we test what's happening. And the idea being it's an iterative process. So it's something where you can make a small behavioral nudge. If anybody's read the book Nudge by Richard Thaler, who recently won the Nobel Prize in Economics. This is part of the idea is that you can make little changes and achieve big outcomes. And the idea, it's an iterative process, so you can keep on improving. So we ran a pilot test first. I'm just going to, quickly go through this. We wanted to see what the baseline is. So we sent Kansas sent a mailer and then a reminder to take part in this program, this new program that they got funding for, to 1,000 parents. And in 6 months, 44 of those 1,000 parents expressed interest, and 42 were mailed applications, and 8 were returned. So the baseline was nobody takes part in this program. You can probably understand why. These are non-custodial parents in debt. They probably have low income. They have no idea what this program is. It doesn't make any sense. They've never heard of a 529 program. So from there, we diagnosed the program, as I said. And this is, on the left side, you'll see the basic process, which is, outreach materials are mailed. Parent has to understand the materials. The parent has to open the letter, see if they even do that. I don't open all my mail anymore. I don't know about you guys, but it's a world where mail is not maybe the most effective form of outreach anymore for people. They have to understand the material, but it was, the material could be complex or problematic. They have to express interest, so they had to call them or write to them, return a postcard and say, I want an application. Then I got sent an application. And then they had to actually take the process to fill out the application. And this is where a lot of things happen. Things go wrong too. A lot of people suffer from planning fallacy, including myself, which means you plan to do something and you don't do it. And then a lot of us just forget things. The way I deal with mail is I put it on my kitchen table in a little spot, and I'm going to get to that later, and eventually the pile gets this tall, and that's stuff I've never dealt with. And I think a lot of people are like that now. It's a different world than it used to be around mail. So we developed the first round test. We revised outreach materials to address key bottlenecks. We offered account seating to some parents. Basically, if you open up an account, we'll give you $25 to get you started. And then we offered in-person sessions to people parents who might be interested in it. We redesigned the mailer. I don't have time to go through all this, but and you'll be able to see it in the presentation, which is available, in the conference materials. But we made the language informal. We made it very colorful and bright. We added in explicitly addressed points that parents might have around concern about this. We really tried to make it an appealing package that would be eye-grabbing and easy to do, and they could check a box and really do that. We had a little graphic here showing how they could save money for it. So again, the whole idea was this is something they could open up, would be interesting instead of a normal state kind of form letter. It would be something that would grab their attention. It had easy infographics to try to explain what the program was about. Our research design this is the research design real quick. We had a control group, of course. We had a program group that got a mailer and reminder informed by behavioral science. And then program group 2 got a mailer and reminder plus account seating. And program group 3 got a mail reminder, account seating, and the offer of an in-person information session. So we went through the findings. We weren't sure what we were going to see. We knew the baseline was really low. And unfortunately, we saw very small impacts. We did have impacts, but they were very small. Just under 2% of the control group expressed interest versus 2.5% of the treatment group members, if you take them in total. Because we had like a sample of like 15,000 people, that was a statistical impact. We could basically, with that level of enrollment, we could measure tiny changes. But it was a trivial change. It really didn't mean much. The group that got the new materials plus the account seating showed the largest increase, close to 1%. Again, a very, very trivial outcome. Talking to the parents, we started to do implementation evaluation. Parents who we know got the materials often said they never received them. Even parents who expressed interest didn't understand the program's mechanics. And the state, probably most concerning, the state implemented the program in an unexpected way. The idea was that parents wouldn't have to spend any more money, so they could basically, instead of sending them the arrears directly to the parent or to the state, they could send it to the 529. It was matched, but the state made them pay their full arrears first, and anything above that was matched. It was something they did without telling us. It was a terrible policy decision, and it was too late to change by the time we found out. So we said, let's try this again. We still had a lot of money left in the grant. The state revised that issue so the parents didn't have to pay their entire child support debt, and then anything above that could be put to the 529, which we thought was a big change. But these are changes they made overall, not within a test. So understand this is changes they made to the program. They increased the cap on matching payments per child to 1,000. Something I didn't mention earlier. They could only get a match up to 500, so they made it to 1,000. But the state couldn't enact other suggestions we had. We suggested they do an opt-out versus an opt-in as a test. Basically, we're going to sign you up for this great program with $25 of seed money. Tell us if you don't want to do it. Was the idea being to try to create some different ways to do it. We also wanted to do automatic deposits from a checking account, so they could just say, or bank account for those that had it, so they could just, make it a regular debit out of their payments. That's how I pay my 529s. I'd probably forget to pay them if I didn't do that. So that's how I pay my electrical bill. That's how we pay all our bills. So the idea was to try to make it as normal as possible. They couldn't figure out the mechanics of that either. So we included an application in the outreach materials too. Remember I said earlier they had the right to get an application. The application was included in the materials. These are some of the things we tested. And we seeded all accounts with $25. And we created a parent referral program. This is something parents suggested. If they can convince their friends to do it, they get $25. Plus the parent got us seed money. And we also used texting services to contact parents. We were actually pretty hopeful about impacts here. And we also had a video, I'm sorry, that they could look at online. I'll skip this part, but basically we used a factorial design to evaluate it. None of the research groups tested in round 2 resulted in any impact. So that was disappointing, because we thought this changes would do something. But we saw something interesting. The analysis conducted comparing the outcomes of the round 1 and round 2, and we basically looked at round 1 versus round 2 between the tests, and we found those analyses suggested that the program changes made by the state to the overall program increased enrollment for everyone. So the state made universal changes around not having to come up with extra money. That was the big one. Account seating and things like that. And it led to parents in both program and control groups to open savings account faster, and also to put more money into those savings accounts. I have a couple charts here to demonstrate that. That's the first, round 1 test is the blue line, round 2 test is the black line. That's the enrollment, how fast the enrollment was. You can see it started to narrow down after 10 months, but certainly it was a lot quicker in the round 2 tests. And the same thing with the matching amount of money that went into the accounts. Again, this is, comparing round 1 and round 2, and they put a lot more money into the accounts in round 2. But we didn't see enough difference between the things we tested, including the application, things like that, didn't have an impact. So the target group, some things we looked at in the overall outcomes, the target group for non-custodial parents with child support debt generally had very low income. National studies show that most child support debt is owed by parents with annual incomes less than $10,000. It might just be impossible to talk about saving money for a child's education to someone who makes that much money. Middle income and upper income families in America don't save enough for their child's education, so maybe it's not surprising that this wasn't an appealing program. Parents, there's studies showing that programs aimed at encouraging savings by low and no income populations have seen modest impacts with participation rates below 10%. And this program, again, was particularly esoteric, I think, for some parents. But the behavioral economics did play a role in understanding some of the challenges. And it gave a better understanding of the challenges for Kansas, and it provided us information about how to approach the program in different ways. And this is where I think something we've seen in a lot of our behavioral tests is that we can change forms and how they look, and we seem to hit an impact on a lot of those, but the impact is often pretty modest. And when we do something more profound, which you're going to hear about from Vermont and Ohio, which includes more hands-on assistance, more constant reminders, we seem to achieve a bigger impact with those behavioral tests. So some of the lessons we came out was they should have thought about creating a default. The state of Maine has done this, for example. New TANF recipients have $500 put into a child savings account for their children. That could have a long-term impact on education for children. We've really felt if we had simplified things, one thing we heard from parents in our second round interviews after the test was that it was just hard. It was hard to remember. They had to write a check, or they had to get a bank order, because they often don't have checking accounts, to try to do this. If there's ways to create automatic deposits and more seeding accounts, and also maybe approaching parents at a different point, like when they open a child support program, do you say, do you want to put some of your child support payments into a match 529 account? That would probably have a real impact in terms of savings money. We also thought programs like this could consider saving money for more tangible goals, maybe anything they want, like car or personal items, housing. And then, some bigger issues. One thing, I didn't know anything about child support 6 years ago until I started working with Susan Brown, who's up here in the state of Ohio on child support. And one thing I've come to the personal conclusion is the main reason people don't pay child support debt is they don't have any money. It's not, there's certainly dead people, they're called deadbeat dads, they call them, there's certainly, you see that name, and there's certainly some parents who are negligent in paying their child support, and there's a lot of reasons, other reasons too, but the main issue is just people just don't have enough money. So, employment programs might be the best way to actually, targeted programs. We also think there might be non-monetary ways to reduce child support debt, parenting time, things like that, and some studies have done this. And I'm going to skip the last one. It was a plug for a new grant we have, but it's basically using procedural justice, and something you'll hear Birdie talk about. It was integral to her study. So I think I was pretty close to on time, too. Great. Thanks.
We're doing questions at the end.
I can't see the
Oh, okay,
slides.
that's fine. That's
Time is it? Good morning. Again, I'm Susan Brown. I'm the Director of Franklin County Child Support in Columbus, Ohio. So thank you for inviting us to RECS. We're excited to share our work in applying behavioral economics to within the child support context. Franklin County, or Columbus, is a metropolitan county encompassing, again, the state capital, Columbus, Ohio. And it's one of the nation's fastest growing cities, currently ranked at 15. Oh, no, that changed to 14 just recently. And our caseload stands about 70,000 cases. You heard from Director Dungy, is our director of, our ODJFS director in Ohio. You heard from her this morning at the plenary. I also would like to introduce Cassie Young, if you would wave or stand up. She is our site manager for our BiX project, and she's also our resident agency expert in BE, or behavioral economics. So our first foray into experimental research projects, excuse me. Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. So our first experimental research project in general and behavioral economics work specifically was through the BiX project. BIAS was funded by ACF and OPRE, and we're told that many of you may be familiar with BIAS, especially since like 25% of the people in the room are program affiliated. So I won't go into much detail about that, but it was a short-term project to experiment with behavioral economics in child support settings. We volunteered for that project and learned a ton about behavioral diagnosis and design through that project. We also caught the behavioral science bug from participating in that project, and now everything we look at has to be behaviorally informed. In 2013, in Ohio, our county and Cuyahoga County participated as sites. Cuyahoga is the home of Cleveland, Ohio, and they wound up being our counterpart in the BiX project as well. Most child support clients, or 75% of them, pay their child support payments through wage garnishment, and some clients make manual payments. For those who make manual payments, there are billing statements that are sent out from the state, but they're not sent to all the clients consistently, and they're very confusing and not what we call behaviorally informed. So we attempted to better remind clients through a combination of improved billing statements and robocalls. Cuyahoga County or Cleveland also tested text reminders. So we found in the BIAS project that all reminders produced a statistically significant impact. They also showed a positive, though not statistically significant trend over time. Sending the non-custodial parents a reminder that their child support was due increased the number of payments, parents making a payment, but not significantly the amount paid. There were, again, no statistically significant differences between the various treatment groups, so basically one reminder is just as good as the next. Or by reminder factor, which is when during the month that you send the reminder out, either early or late, and again, mail, robocall, or both didn't make a significant difference. One of the benefits of participating in BIAS, it introduced our agency and our staff to behavioral economics. They assisted in mailing out many of the 11,000 payment reminders that we sent out. And through this, that they began to understand the role of behavioral economics in our program. And again, so the difference was about 2.9%. And again, as Peter mentioned, the biggest issue is the lack of money and jobs by non-custodial parents in making their payments. So as a result of working on BIAS, and because of how much we learned from our partners, such as the Office of Child Support Enforcement and our social research firm, MDRC, Peter and his team, we decided to apply for the ACF grant BiX for a longer-term project in behavioral science. During BIAS, we wanted to tackle our modification process, because BIAS was a short-term study, we could not make it the subject for BIAS, but we did decide to make it the subject for our BiX project. The modification process in child support, sometimes called review and adjustment, is the process by which our agency recalculates child support orders. Clients automatically are eligible for a recalculation every 3 years, or when a client experiences significant change in circumstances. The process includes the following primary steps. Thank you. The client must complete an application indicating what reason they think they qualify for a modification. And if approved, the clients must send a packet of documents back that requests information such as their income and health insurance expenses. And for the modification to occur, the parent who applied must return their paperwork. If the other parent doesn't return their paperwork, then the agency uses reasonable assumptions or imputation of income to be included in the modification calculation. So step one, so this is applying the behavioral diagnosis and design that Peter described. And as was stated in the plenary, this is how we untangle the problem or the issue that we're having. So we first defined the problem and the goals that we intended to have over the project. And over several years, Cuyahoga and Franklin mailed 18,436 mod applications to parties. However, only 10,976 applications, or 59.5%, were returned to the agency. Of the 10,976 returned, only 4,720 of the applications, 4,720 or 43% dropped out of the process by failing to provide the required financial information or forms required to complete the process. So this means that clients needing both higher and lower orders, what sometimes we refer to as right size orders, are missing out on modifications. This means that some parents receiving the payments are missing out on money that they could be receiving as so critical to their household. And then others are racking up an incredible amount of debt, which negatively affects both the clients and our performance. So the goal of the project is to increase the proportion of clients who successfully complete the review process so that more modifications are completed and that we're able to include more accurate and complete information factored into those calculations. The next step was the diagnosis of the issue. We mapped out our current processes and interviewed through focus groups, clients, and staff to better understand where clients tend to drop out. We found that they generally fall out of the proverbial modification boat at two steps, the application step and the parent information form step. We determined that bottlenecks occurred during the during the application step, where many clients do not understand the eligibility criteria, they don't attach the required and they don't attach the required documents. In addition, many clients see the modification process as a mystery and utterly confusing. Our current process causes cognitive load, inattention, and procrastination due to not understanding the process or being overwhelmed by it. So we designed form interventions to address these issues. We also determined that many clients request a modification and are approved, but then they fail to turn in the paperwork, meaning that the modification never occurs. We hypothesized that this is partially due to the fact that many clients receive two different forms, one from us and one from the state, that are somewhat similar. The different forms are of different lengths and they ask slightly different questions. So we believe the length of the form and the amount of unnecessary information that is asked causes clients to procrastinate on doing the paperwork, and the length of time that it takes, there's a 45-day period between application and the review date, causes further procrastination, and they forget to finish the paperwork. It's the pile of mail on the desk, as Peter described. The second stage of our intervention was aimed at addressing these issues. So step 3 is the design of the intervention. And as we mentioned, we made changes to our forms. Our new application, thank you, reduced cognitive load, hassle factors, and procrastination because it made it simpler and behaviorally informed. We also created a frequently asked question form that addresses inattention and memory failure by giving clients a picture of the process from the beginning. The simplified parent form hits the same areas as the application. So the form changes are necessary and helpful. However, we wanted to take the project a step further. We created a Mod Squad staff intervention, which included 2 staff members working exclusively on modifications, and they received specialized training that will be outlined in the upcoming slide. This helped in general with procedural justice and really touches on all the cognitive bases because it helps staff in reducing their own cognitive biases and equips them with skills to assist clients in addressing theirs. These workers not only perform modification, but they act as navigators to assist clients through the process. So step 4 is the test. Our test occurred in 2 stages at the application and parent information form stages. We had a control group for each stage and then had program groups receive new forms. In addition, during the 2nd stage, the program group was served by the mod squad, and the 2 workers serviced half of the clients and provided proactive assistance and outreach. So I know you can't read these forms. However, you can pull them up on the app, but I'll point out some of the changes that we made in the forms. So we utilized lists in lieu of paragraphs of text. We omitted jargon and changed the reading level. We gave information about what comes next. We asked the client how they would like to be contacted, so we could personalize the outreach to them. We simplified the form. We simplified the original by asking the first question about whether they automatically qualified before diving into the reasons about beyond automatic qualification. We included a signature line and an honesty statement at the bottom. It may seem counterintuitive to sign prior to providing the information, but research shows that if an honesty statement comes before someone is to report their income for taxes, they report more of their income in a more accurate way than a control group. Better organized the reasons for qualifying in a table also. And then the second document is our revised affidavit. We made sure that the date of the review was clearly listed. We made an explicit warning that the review is not a hearing because that's very confusing. We asked for contact information first thing, and we pre-populated where we could the form. We asked for preferred contact information, included instructions in a simple bullet format, and we highlighted the option to waive the 45 wait period and gave it a 45-day wait period, and we gave it a fancy name called fast-tracked option. We also provided an FAQ with both the application and the parent info form. It did not seem anecdotally that this helped most clients because clients still ask staff the same basic questions, which could have been answered on the FAQ. And this suggested that additional explainers and paperwork, even if they're helpful, go unused due to cognitive load, and that personal assistance cannot be replaced by an FAQ. This is probably one of the most important things that we did. We strongly believe that we could make our process as behaviorally and as human-centered as possible. Yet if the staff administering the program were not behavioral, the intervention would not go as far. Our typical caseworker has a bachelor's degree from various fields. They do not generally have training in behavioral science, and our training program is pretty exclusively focused on the technical aspects of our job. The trainings provided as part of the project were new to the agency and only given to the intervention staff. So this training included introduction to BE, random control evaluation, and the BiX grant project, modification training, a refresher, understanding the client and case management 101, motivational interviewing, walking in a client's shoes and how implicit bias affects us, behavioral economics 101 and living with scarcity, cultural competent casework, and connecting clients to community resources and jobs. This training changed case management remarkably. So these are the preliminary findings, and we're soon to have our final evaluation findings, which we understand may be much more significant. So parents who received hands-on assistance from dedicated modification unit increased the proportion of orders that received a decision on their modification review by a statistically significant amount, over 10%. However, parents who only received revised forms for the first stage of the process did not see a statistically significant increase in key outcomes. So these findings suggest the power of behaviorally informed individual supports. So basically, just real quickly, some of the lessons learned. Form changes only go so far. Personalized outreach is probably most important. Involvement of staff increases buy-in for behavioral concepts. Process changes, simplifying, removing steps, and hands-on assistance achieves better outcomes. And why should you even care about this? Why should you do this work? Because it definitely does increase outcomes for clients and staff. Clients provide feedback and voice appreciation. It improves the agency perception. It changes your thinking about service delivery. Everything you look at, you'll look at now from a behavioral lens. Efficiencies and innovations free up staff time to do family-centered work. It can affect statewide and even nationwide policy, and it builds an evidence base. So in the interest of moving on, I will hand off to Birdie. I suppose we'll field questions at the end. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. We're really excited to share Vermont's results from the resolution meeting project under the BiX project. It's made a huge difference in Vermont in how they work with parents, and so we're excited to share that with others. Let's see, right in the center?
On the right.
Okay. So our project in Vermont kind of focused on early engagement with parents and to focus on both mom and dad. Historically, Vermont has focused initially on the custodial parent, and then the non-custodial parent received information from the court once it had gotten to the court level. So when in Vermont, it's a judicial state, so parents are required, they come in for a meeting with the child support staff person. It would be the custodial parent that's invited in, and then they're required to go through a court case manager conference process prior to going to a hearing. So there's kind of that mid-level process that's in the law in Vermont that families would have to go through that. Luckily, there is an option for the magistrates in Vermont to waive that. So we tried to take advantage of that a little bit to see if we could get to the child support order sooner. So in Vermont, what we did initially with the BiX project, as Peter explained, is we looked at the overarching goals that we were trying to achieve. So we were trying to increase the amount of child support that was coming in to support children. We tried to improve the parent perception of child support because we found when we did focus groups that they really felt that child support was there for custodial parents. And also tried to reduce child support arrears or past due child support. And when we did the diagnosis, we looked at a wide range of measures within child support. We didn't really know where this was going to take us. And one of the things that we found was that the percentage of successful court case manager conferences was very low. It was 23.5%. And we kind of looked at that number and went, whoa, that's, for the amount of time it takes to get to that point, it wasn't very high. And we also found that close to 50% were either rescheduled or parents did not attend. And so this is a conference that parents are served to attend, so there's service of process involved. And we also, one of the things that we realized through the process is that the courts didn't have the depth of staff. So if a court, a lot of the areas just had one case manager that did these conferences. So if that case manager had to be out on vacation or was sick, all of the conferences for that day were canceled. So there wasn't a lot of depth. And then we also found, when we looked at it, that the average number of days from when a case opened with the Office of Child Support to the first conference, court case manager conference, was 155 days. And it just jumped out and said, we really need to look at this and see if there's something we can do to move this forward. So what we did is we did a test that compared the court case manager conference to what our treatment was, which was the creation of a resolution meeting. And we spent a lot of hours talking about what we were going to call this meeting to encourage parents. And we finally landed on a resolution meeting because that's what we were trying to achieve. And so we are comparing these two meetings and the success rate of the meetings. So in our control process, which is the court case manager conference process, the involvement of the non-custodial parent is this opening letter that was called a welcome letter from OCS, which really wasn't very welcoming to start with, and notifying them that that case was open with child support. The next thing that they heard was that they were served by the court, either through certified mail or by a sheriff, that there was a court case manager conference that they were required to attend. The custodial parent, on the other hand, is invited in by the Office of Child Support staff for an appointment, goes through all of the information, completes a filing, completes the financial affidavit. It's filed by the court then, and it's then they set it for a case manager conference. And then both parents would come in for the court case manager conference, which is set about 4 weeks out from when it's filed. The case manager conference is then held, and if there's no agreement, a hearing is scheduled with the magistrate. And oftentimes those meetings would be rescheduled if the parents didn't show, so there would be a second case manager conference. So in the treatment group, we really tried to look at both parents in the same light. So right now, under the treatment process, both parents are invited in for the appointment. And when they're invited in, they get a much smaller packet of information that goes out. It's actually an invitation. The financial affidavit and court filings are completed by the parents with the Office of Child Support staff person. So it's completed as an interactive process with both parents and the child support staff person. If there's no agreement, then if there is agreement, the signed stipulation is sent to the court for approval, and the child support process is done. The order is in place. There's no service of process needed if both parents attend and they sign off to say that they would accept first-class service. So there is some cost savings related to that. And if there's no agreement, then the court will schedule for a court case manager conference or a hearing. If both parents do attend, we request that the court waives the court case manager conference and goes directly to hearing. And through the treatment process, which is the resolution meeting, we're able to kind of narrow down what issues there's disagreement on, as well as ensure that we know where there is agreement. So it's a randomized controlled trial, and we lost some of our numbers. So we had 947 participants in the project, and we're continuing to do this. So that number is growing every day. And my numbers on my slide are also very small. But it's broken down about 51 and 49%. And actually, because of our systems piece, we randomized on the last digit of the non-custodial parent social security number. And that we did a lot of testing beforehand to make sure it would come out close. and it worked out perfectly. And was an fairly easy way to do it without having a completely different system. And so the key aspects of this intervention is that it was in 3 counties of Vermont. I'm not going to tell you what our caseload in Vermont is because I can't compare to Susan in Ohio, so we'll skip over that part. So we did 3 counties in Vermont, and we worked with the courts to try and get their buy-in. Notice I said try. That was a bit of a challenge back in the beginning. And we did, the resolution meetings were set. They replaced the first meeting historically held with the custodial parent. OCS staff ran these meetings instead of having a court case manager conference. And in Vermont, when you come into a child support office, you don't have to go through security. So there isn't, unlike going to court, you don't have to unload everything and have it go through the scanner and go through the sheriffs at the door. So it's a little more informal. And both parents are invited in. The study ran February, and these results are based on February 2016 through January 2018. The invitation packet included behaviorally informed letters. It's very transparent, so there's a CC to the other parent at the bottom of each of the letters. They get a map and calendar is included in the packet. There's a genetic testing info sheet, and we use a large mailing envelope that they can also use to put in their documents to come to the meeting. And then we also didn't want it to look like a child support bill. There's also a priming exercise, which is given to parents when they arrive at the meeting. So when they come to the meeting, they have a 1-page priming exercise. And this is just to get them thinking about what they want for their children. We really want the meeting to focus on the children's needs and take away a bit of the focus from the other parent. And this is for their own use. It's not shared with the other parent. It's not discussed. And we just want them to begin thinking about these different things. And all of these documents are on the site, so you can pull them up and look at them. The resolution meeting, it's focused on fairness and involvement rather than the meeting outcome. We wanted to reduce the cognitive overload by helping with the forms like financial affidavits, and we wanted to provide multiple opportunities for questions. So there's reminder calls that happen. They can ask questions during that time, and we wanted to explain what to expect so they didn't feel like they were coming into the meeting blind. So what we found in terms of the results is that we found that in terms of participation, there was an 8.4% percentage point increase in participation for the resolution meetings. And then the percentage of stipulations, we found that 11.3% of more cases were stipulating during the resolution meeting than at the court case manager conference. And then what we also found, which was kind of an unexpected consequence, is that there were a number of cases that were dismissed or the filing wasn't appropriate. So because both parents came into the meeting and they had each other's financial information and discussed it, they decided not to go forward with a modification. So it actually reduced the number of cases going forward by 10.3%. So it saved court time on that end because they didn't have to schedule it or do service or anything. Some of the non-experimental results that we found, which actually are quite significant, is that we reduced the number of days from when a case opening to when there was a resolution by 70 days. So that's huge. That's 2 months worth of child support. And then we also found that when, staff were telling us that when both parents participated, they were more apt to stipulate, and the numbers showed that. So there was a 21.9 percentage point increase in the resolution meeting versus the case manager conference meeting when both parents participated. So that was quite significant, especially considering that you don't then have those court costs or those service costs attached to that. And then we also had an after-meeting survey. And so the after-meeting survey, parents reported that the meeting was helpful to them. 95.9% agreed or strongly agreed. They also felt that the child support specialist in 98.4% of the cases did not choose a side. And that was one of the things that we really would hear in terms of complaints, is that OCS staff are always for the custodial parent. So that was really huge. And then the resolution meeting was fair. 95.6 either agreed or strongly agreed. So whether it came out in their favor or not, they felt that the meeting was fair. And so in general, or just in closing, I want to say that some of the key components were providing procedural justice training for staff, and really shift the way that staff think about how they work with parents and how they word what they say, from customer service, call center, on down to where they meet in the regions. They've shifted the way they talk about things. Vermont Office of Child Support has now coined the term BIXy, so that as they're talking about processes or they're talking about changes to forms, they say, well, that's very BIXy, or let's change this so this is more BIXy. So there's really been a huge awareness, and they've incorporated procedural justice into their new worker training. So now whenever anybody starts with the Office of Child Support, they go through this exercise and they go through the procedural justice training. And it's really been really well accepted. And it's taken a while to get there. When I first started and would go to some regions, I'd walk away, and as one of my coworkers said, we've all had those meetings where we feel like a human piñata. That was it. Because they were changing the way they did things for a long period of time. So, and Vermont has a strategic plan in place to incorporate resolution meetings to the rest of the state over the next 2 years. So it's very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roberta. So I want to make sure everybody knows that you can request the PowerPoints from this panel, and I think from all of the RECs, by sending an email to recs@impaqint.com. And so this is the time for questions. There is a microphone in the middle of the room. Please ask one question at a time. For those of you watching via the live stream, you can enter your questions there and someone will read them out for you here in the room. So while people are thinking of their questions, I'll get us started. And I also wanted to mention, so the work that the BiX work in Ohio and Vermont that was presented on here today, we don't have reports or briefs on that publicly available yet, but we are working on that. Those should be available in the next year, I'll say. And but there is the Kansas study that Peter presented on is available. And in preparation for today, I read the full report. It's available on MDRC's website. Everybody should check it out. It's a really well-written report. It starts with a great overview of the issue of child support debt for people who aren't familiar with that, and talks about the bottlenecks of the program and all the issues that could cause low uptake among parents, and describing the interventions and the challenges with their implementation. So, Peter, my sort of comment, or really not much of a question, more of a comment, given the complex context, I was really surprised that the report and the study materials provide the statement that it is difficult to encourage low to moderate income individuals to save money as sort of the main takeaway for the work. Today in the presentation you framed it a little bit differently, which seemed a little bit better, but my concern with this is that it characterizes low to moderate income people as different from high income people in some way other than income, and in whether or not they respond to incentives to save. So in my previous position, I was a manager for the Assets for Independence program, which funds special use match savings accounts for low to moderate income people. A randomized controlled trial of that program found that 1 year after enrollment, members of the treatment group had meaningful new savings. $657 at the median increase, or a $799 mean increase. And your colleagues at MDRC reported on the impact of another match savings program for low to moderate income people, Save USA. And in the final findings for that, MDRC found that Save USA increased the average total savings held by $522, or 30%, and this was 3.5 years after the enrollment into the program. So for me, both of these studies and others support the case that low to moderate income people do respond to incentives to save under certain circumstances. And as you pointed out, Americans in general have low levels of savings. A 2015 Pew survey found that 1/3 of Americans reported having no savings, including 10% of people making $100,000 or more. And of course, behavioral economics has already helped us realize that high-income individuals' savings behaviors aren't aligned with their preferences, and there have been changes to retirement programs as a result. Now, many employers default their employees into retirement savings, thus allowing them to take advantage of these savings incentives without having to overcome the obstacles to enrollment. And this is an approach that you suggested to Kansas, as you mentioned in your presentation, to increase enrollment in this program, but the state was not able to make that change. So based on your report, there seemed to me to be many aspects of the Kansas Child Support Savings Initiative that contributed to the low take-up of the program. And focusing so pointedly on how low to moderate income people respond to savings incentives, to me seems like to be overemphasizing one particular factor. So just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I don't actually, even though I was a main author of the report, I don't exactly remember the words I used. But in terms of the context of saving money for college education, something parents said it was just a really distal goal. Mm-hmm. It was just something that was really hard to comprehend, given the other challenges in their lives. So I think that's true even for moderate and high income families. They don't save enough money. So I think that was one of the major challenges facing us. And then also just, the reality of, I think it's not, these low income people, generally savings rates are low, and if you have less money, you're going to have more challenges to save. But this is also a population that had child support debt, which is a sort of a special category in some ways. They had a possible criminal liability and other issues related to their debt. So it was something where, again, I think it was really hard to shift the focus away from that, and the fear connected to that, and the reality that, the minimum was for $1,000 of child support debt to take part in this, but the reality is a lot of the parents had $10,000 or $20,000 of child support debt, so again, that was an overriding concern. Again, that's at least the thrust of my, my argument today, but I accept your criticism. There are certainly studies showing that you can increase savings for low-income individuals.
Victoria?
Hi, my name is Victoria K. I'm with the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. Thank you all for your great presentations this morning. My question is for Bertie and Susan. Bertie, you kind of started touching on this toward the end, but I was wondering if you could each talk about what's next for your agencies in using behavioral science and insights from behavioral science, and especially whether you anticipate being able to do future randomized controlled trials of this nature.
Well, in Vermont, they've actually have started to do some various different tests, not necessarily random controlled trials, but they have incorporated smaller tests in terms of changes to the enforcement process, and also outreach to parents to try it in different regions to see if there's an impact prior to implementing statewide and jumping in for the whole state. So I don't know that there'll be a randomized control trial, right, besides the one that we're doing right now on employer intervention. But I think Vermont definitely plans to continue and has already started on their own doing some of more informal tests.
Also, do you mind if I add one thing to that? As I said, these could be iterative tests, and one thing Birdie and I and others, of course, came out of the first test that she explained today was that if you can get parents to show up for the meetings, there's really good outcomes. So one thing Vermont did was they provided a travel card, basically to reimburse for travel as an iteration of that test. And I think you also made continuous improvements to it, throughout too. So I think that's, it's an example of that. If you can get parents there, it's really good. So let's try to find other ways to get parents there.
In Columbus, we're looking at these outcomes to change the way we conduct modifications in Franklin County. And Cassie, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute to talk about phase 2 and possibly phase 3 of the BiX project. But behavioral economics work also informed our proposal. We also applied for the procedural justice alternatives to contempt grant, also offered by ACF. And we're well into the implementation phase of that project, conducting our contempt process in a completely different way than through the judicial process. And we're already seeing some significant results of that. So, but regarding BiX, Cassie, if you wouldn't mind explaining what we're doing in phase 2 and phase 3.
Phase 2 of our project, we're using technology. Well, we're trying to test out different methods of trying to reach our clients about new technology. So a lot of our program goes through the mail, and obviously not everyone reads their mail anymore. So looking at mailing versus emailing versus texting and how we communicate with clients. And then our phase 3 of BiX, and I think this is really true of any and all of the sites across the country, is we're trying to figure out how we really leverage what we've learned to infuse that throughout our program statewide and nationwide. So a big thing that we're going to be focusing on is mainly transferring the knowledge, trying to empower other programs to dive into this work because it's very intimidating, but at the end of the day, there's very simple tactics and information that can help us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The one thing I wanted to add, both because neither Birdie or Susan mentioned it, the cost of doing these programs were negligible to zero. And in fact, I think, Cassie, I know you argued it probably saved Ohio money to do this test. And Birdie, with this, so much less court time and such a shorter process, it seems like it would have to save money. So they were not also, they were certainly cost efficient that way.
Anne?
Hi, Gretchen. Hi, boss. Ann Yeoman, I'm an asset consultant. I've been around in asset building for quite a while, most recently working in children's savings accounts. But although it was not the direct focus of these comments, clearly in the case of Vermont and Ohio, to me anyway, what really has made this work is the staff training and the changing of the attitude amongst the staff. They're getting it, so to speak, and basically absorbing this. And so I wonder, for Peter, you mentioned that Kansas basically didn't do a lot of the things that you suggested that might have made the process or the actual, what they were trying to get at, more effective. And is that just sheer regulatory intransigence, or there was no training for staff, or there really wasn't a fundamental understanding of the potential, or this kind of mental mind shift?
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking that, your frontline people is what makes it work.
Yeah. I think there's a few things in Kansas. One is the state's in fiscal crisis. You probably have heard about that. It's just got massive debt and problems with that. They privatized their child support agency, so they There's like 15 people that work for child support in the state of Kansas. They contract out all the services, and there's multiple providers that do the collections. And I think they felt it was impossible to get some kind of, at least in the time frame of what we were doing, get that sort of change done among these multiple providers. So those are probably the two underlying issues. And I also think they had some philosophical objections to being too, perceived as being too generous to non-custodial parents. So those are.
So is this program dead now, or are they going to continue?
No, the program still exists. Actually, both programs still exist. It's just.
It's not effective, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Very low uptake.
Yeah, very low uptake.
Just to add on to that, we, in Vermont, when we did the transportation card intervention, so basically we added on the transportation reimbursement of $25 for people that attended the meetings. And we did get quite a bit of, it was probably half and half in terms of resistance from staff in doing that. Some of the comments were that, well, we're already providing free service to them. Now we're going to give them a $25 transportation card too. So Vermont then did implicit bias training for staff. And I think that kind of turned the tables a little bit when people started to recognize that we all have implicit biases and that we bring to the table when we work with parents, and those biases actually impact how effective we are providing those services and how do we manage those. And so I think that, there's still some work to do, but as Vermont, as the director went around and did focus groups in developing the strategic plan, definitely there was a shift in staff. But I think it takes, implicit bias training. I think it takes procedural justice. I think it takes being bold, and I can say that I told, one of my roles, because I'm not a state OCS staff person, I can kind of step in and say, I'm not in the line of supervision, and, I can challenge staff a little bit. So I'm not always the most popular person in the blog, but I kind of at least make them think about how in the past they've said certain things, and maybe there's a new way to do it that people can understand better, and that's maybe more respectful and fair to where somebody is at without putting any judgment on them.
So we are out of time. I know we got started a little bit late, so though I wanted to see if there are any late breaking questions. Are we good? Okay. Well, please join me in thanking our panel.